I'm going to do a series of several short tutorials on how to build a chipboard structure that has this pivoting drawer feature. So essentially it's a round structure, and then the cover is a half round, and then it has another half round tray that fits on the inside. And I'm going to build this with a pivot point and see if I can get this to work. So that's the main concept right there. So I'm going to build this from the inside out, because there's going to be some tolerances because this is fitting inside and we are wrapping this with a material. So there's going to be some consideration for tolerances. So I started the structure. I cut the half round for the drawer. So this is out of 1/8" chipboard. It's relatively thick. And I'm using 2 layers of 1/8" chipboard to create this front wall. So that's pretty thick. That brings us up close to 1/4 inch. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm able to put this hole right through here. And I'm going to use a pin. I'm actually using a nail. I'm going to cut off the head and put that right through that material and have that protrude into the outer casing of the structure. And then that will be my pivot point. I'm trying to reduce as much friction as possible. So we'll see if I can get this to work. So I'm going to build this inner tray first, and I'm actually going to wrap it. And then I'm going to make all the calculations for the outer part, because it's hard to estimate exactly how much clearance I'm going to need. If it's a little bit too tight, it won't function. So we'll take one step at a time and see if we can get this to work. So I'm going to use a bent lamination technique where I'm going to glue this piece on the outside. I have these, this chipboard has a grain to it, so I'm picking the grain where it's the most flexible because I want this to bend. And I'm just using this wooden dowel to kind of get this to curl a little. I don't want it to resist the arc that I'm trying to glue. So by doing this, it kind of holds this nice arc. And it'll be easier for me to glue this on here. So all I'm going to do is add the glue to these surfaces. And I'm going to wrap it around and tape it. And then when that's holding in position, I will wrap another piece around that and glue that together, and we'll end up with this bent lamination. So bent lamination is where you glue the material together and you hold it in its curved orientation, and that makes the arc stay, and it wants to hold. So a combination of using this bottom of the drawer and the front of the drawer as my former, that I can press this around. I'm just going to hold that down on the bottom. And I only have so many fingers to hold this, so I'm going to use some tape, sort of like a clamping procedure. I'm going to pull that in nice and tight across the top here. Now I need to make sure all of this is holding in nice and tight. I'm going to pull that all the way around to the other side. I'm going to check this from the bottom. So I have a nice tight seam here. A little bit of the glue is oozing out, which is good. So that means I know that I have 100% contact in there. Now this tape, I'm going to do this from the other direction like this, and hold that to the bottom, and then bring that up to the top like this. Get that to hold. So now I can apply pressure all around here with my hand and get that to hold tight. If I keep everything nice and square, get my edges to line up, I have nice square contact on the front, then everything should be as straight as possible. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll be very close to it. So when this dries, with the other layer glued on here, I'll be able to wrap this, and then I can make my calculations about how this next part is going to work. So I have started the outside parts. I took some guesses about how this is going to work. I have the other piece here. So the outer drawer consists of the top and the bottom, and then again, a bent lamination around the outside. So it creates a cavity here. So the drawer is open from the top, and this will be open from the front, and I'll have my pivot point. So I did make some calculations. I'm taking a little bit of a guess about how much clearance I'm going to need. So I'm going to bend these 2 pieces of 60 thousandths chipboard. So that'll add up to the 1/8 inch of material. And then I have a little extra for the wrap. And that's the part that's a little bit of a guess. So I took a guess on that, and I'm also going to need to take a guess on the height, because I'm going to be wrapping these pieces of chipboard around the outside cover. So I have to add up all these thicknesses, the top, the bottom, and the allowance for the wrap, and then make sure I have enough clearance. So I have quite a bit here. I'm gonna double check after I wrap the inside tray and see if I have enough to get that to work. Okay, so I'm just gonna try to get this to dry so I can demonstrate the bent lamination process. So let's see if this will hold enough so I can do the next step. That looks like that might be okay. I'm gonna save that and put that on after I glue this next layer on. And I'm just gonna pull this back. I just leave that right there. Okay, so the bent lamination, let me get rid of these larger ones, is taking another piece and putting glue on this surface and gluing these in this arced orientation. And that'll give me a nice strong part. And it gives me a nice even wall thickness. It's the 2 layers of 60 thousandths equal the 1/8 inch. So I'll end up with 1/8 inch walls on all the parts, the sides and the bottom. Like I mentioned, the front, I'm making that a little bit bigger so I can put my pivot point through there. All right, so that should do it. So I'm gonna start right at the same edge. I'm actually lining that up pretty accurately right there. I'm just gonna move in just a little bit like this. And then I'm gonna try to put that piece of tape back to hold that down. So now I'm using my fingers to guide this as tightly as I can. I'm gonna squeeze it a little bit as I go. Get that to press nice and tight against that inside layer. Check my bottom, see how the clearance is. So it's nice and closed there. I don't see any gaps. Okay, I'm gonna pull that down just a little bit. I'm gonna hold that here. So I'm gonna make the bottom line up smooth, and it might be slightly off on top, but it's easier to sand that top edge than the bottom edge. So I can get that nice and perfect like this. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to this larger piece and use that to hold both of these pieces together. And obviously I have this excess here. I'm gonna trim that off and then sand that down. So this looks pretty accurate. It's pretty tight there. Okay, so that's the bent lamination process. So when that dries, this arc will hold really nicely. Even if I were to take off this front, this arc would still hold because it's being glued in this arc orientation. Okay, so that's the fabrication of the inside tray. And I have my clearance there for my pivot point. So hopefully I'll be able to just pivot that part inside of the outer sleeve. All right, so next one, I'll sand this up and I'm gonna wrap this so that I can make my calculations for the outer part.